The shadow of death had danced through the mining town of Silver Creek, Colorado for 3 weeks straight, taking 16 souls with it, but death would not claim Rosalie Jenkins today, not if Owen Matthews had anything to say about it. The summer of 1878 had brought more than just scorching heat to the frontier. It had delivered a vicious fever that swept through the settlement like wildfire, leaving devastation in its wake. Rosalie shivered violently beneath the quilt, her auburn hair plastered to her feverish skin. The threadbare cloth Owen pressed to her brow was already warming from the heat radiating off her. "Rest," he whispered, his voice low and steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "You need to rest, Miss Jenkins." She hadn't opened her eyes in 2 days, but her body fought some invisible battle, thrashing one moment, trembling the next. Outside the small cabin, the western sky blazed orange as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Rockies. Owen dipped the cloth back into the basin of cool water, wrung it out, and returned it to her forehead. A week ago, he'd been nothing more than the quiet cowboy who delivered supplies to the Jenkins General Store. Now he found himself the only thing standing between this woman and the grave. "Please," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to Rosalie or to God, "please fight." He'd never been much for prayer, but these past days had changed him. Something about watching this fierce, independent woman who'd built her life from nothing after arriving alone in Silver Creek 3 years prior, now rendered helpless by illness, had awakened something inside him. Owen barely knew her beyond polite exchanges across the store counter, but he'd volunteered to help when her illness became known. Now, with most other townsfolk either sick themselves or fled, he found himself her sole caretaker. The door creaked open behind him. Doc Miller, looking 2 decades older than his 50 years, stood in the doorway, medical bag clutched in his trembling hand. "Any change?" the doctor asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Owen shook his head. "Fever's still high. She took a few sips of water, about an hour ago." Doc Miller nodded grimly as he approached the bed. His eyes held the haunted look of a man who had lost too many patients in too short a time. "That's something at least," he murmured, setting his bag down and pulling out his stethoscope. "More than poor widower Thompson managed before he passed this morning." Owen's stomach tightened. "Thompson died?" "Afraid so. That makes 17. The doctor placed the stethoscope against Rosalie's chest, listening intently before moving it across different points. His face revealed nothing. After several long moments, Doc Miller straightened up. "Her lungs sound clearer than yesterday." "That's good. Keep getting fluids in her when you can. The fever breaks, or it doesn't. That's the cruel truth of this thing." "And if it breaks?" Owen asked, not daring to hope too much. "Then she might have a chance." Doc Miller began packing his bag. "I'll check back tomorrow. I've got 3 more to see before nightfall." When the doctor had gone, Owen returned to his post beside Rosalie's bed. The room had grown darker, and he lit the oil lamp on the bedside table. Its warm glow illuminated Rosalie's face, high cheekbones, straight nose, lips chapped from fever. Even in illness, there was something striking about her. "You're stronger than this," Owen told her quietly as he adjusted the quilt. "Everyone in town knows Rosalie Jenkins doesn't give up without a fight." It was true. In the 3 years since she'd arrived in Silver Creek, she'd transformed a failing general store into the heart of the community. Owen had admired her determination from afar, the way she haggled with suppliers and stood her ground with the rougher elements that sometimes passed through town. A woman alone in the West had to be tough, and Rosalie was as tough as they came. Yet now, seeing her vulnerable, something shifted in his chest. Owen had spent his 30 years of life keeping people at arm's length. Orphaned young and raised by a series of reluctant relatives, he'd learned early that attachment led to pain. He'd drifted into cowboy work because it suited his solitary nature, signing on with different ranches, never staying long enough to form connections. 6 months at the Mitchell Ranch outside Silver Creek was the longest he'd stayed anywhere in years. And now, instead of moving on as he'd planned, he found himself sitting vigil beside a woman he barely knew, willing her to live with every fiber of his being. The night stretched endlessly as Owen tended to Rosalie. He spoke to her sometimes, telling her about the clear night sky or the mountains he'd crossed. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but it felt right somehow, as if his voice might be a lifeline she could follow back. Near dawn, her fever spiked dangerously. Owen worked frantically, replacing the cloth on her forehead every few minutes, wiping her arms and neck with cool water. Her breathing grew shallow, rapid. "Don't you dare," he said firmly, abandoning gentleness for authority. "Don't you dare give up, Rosalie Jenkins. This town needs you. People need you." The unspoken thought hung in the air. I might need you too. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Rosalie's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze, unfocused at first, slowly settled on Owen's face. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. Owen's hands shook as he helped her take a sip from the cup beside the bed. Her eyes closed again, but her breathing seemed easier, more regular. By mid-morning, Doc Miller confirmed what Owen had begun to hope. The fever had broken. Rosalie was weak, desperately so, but she had crossed some invisible threshold back toward the living. "She'll need care for weeks yet," Doc cautioned. "The body doesn't recover from something like this overnight." Owen nodded, relief making him lightheaded. "I'll stay as long as she needs." Doc Miller gave him an appraising look. "You've hardly slept in days, son. I can ask Mrs. Peterson to spell you for a while. Her husband's on the mend now." "No," Owen said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "I mean, I promised I'd see her through this. I don't mind." The doctor's knowing smile made Owen shift uncomfortably. "As you wish. Just make sure you get some rest yourself. You're no good to her if you collapse." After the doctor left, Owen pulled a chair closer to Rosalie's bedside. Her eyes opened again, clearer this time. "You're still here," she murmured, her voice faint but steady. "Said I would be," Owen replied simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "How long?" "4 days now." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "The store." "Closed," Owen said. "Most of the town is. The fever." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "How many?" Owen hesitated. 17. So far. Rosalie closed her eyes, grief etching lines in her pale face. "Who?" He told her the names gently, watching as tears slipped from beneath her closed eyelids. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "For staying. For caring for me when others wouldn't." "Some wanted to," Owen corrected. "Doc's been stretched thin. And folks are scared." "But not you." He shrugged. "Figured if my time was up, it was up. Couldn't just leave you to face it alone." Her eyes, the color of summer sage, studied his face. "I don't think I know your first name, Mr. Matthews." "Owen," he said, suddenly aware of how intimate this sick room had become. "Owen Matthews." "Owen," she repeated softly. "I'm in your debt." He shook his head. "No debt. Just get well." As the days passed, Rosalie gradually strengthened. Owen continued his vigil, though he allowed himself short breaks to care for her horse and check on the store. The fever that had ravaged Silver Creek began to loosen its grip on the town. Funerals were held, businesses slowly reopened, and life cautiously resumed. 1 week after her fever broke, Rosalie insisted on sitting up in a chair by the window while Owen changed her bedding. "Tell me about yourself," she said, watching him work with efficient movements. "All this time, and I hardly know you." Owen rarely spoke about himself, but something about her direct gaze made evasion impossible. As he tucked fresh sheets over the mattress, he found himself telling her about his childhood in Missouri, His parents' early deaths from cholera, the string of relatives who passed him around, and his eventual decision to head west at 16. Been drifting ever since, he concluded. Ranch work suits me. No one expects a cowboy to put down roots. And yet you've stayed in Silver Creek longer than usual, Rosalie observed. Owen paused. Suppose I have. Why? He busied himself with the pillowcase. Good grazing land. Fair boss. No reason to move on yet. I see. Her tone suggested she saw more than he'd admitted. When the bed was ready, Owen helped her back into it, acutely aware of her fragility as his hands supported her. She'd lost weight during her illness, but there was a wiry strength returning to her frame. Your turn, he said, settling into the chair beside her. How does a woman like you end up running a store alone in a place like Silver Creek? Rosalie's smile held a touch of sadness. I came west with my husband, Robert. We had dreams of building something together. She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band she still wore. Barely 2 months after we arrived, he was killed in a mining accident. I had a choice: return east to my father's house in Philadelphia as a widowed daughter, or stay and make something of the little we'd started. You stayed, Owen said, admiration in his voice. I stayed, she agreed. Robert believed in this town, in its future. I couldn't bear to abandon that dream. The store was struggling when he died, but I was determined. 3 years later, here we are. Owen nodded. He'd heard pieces of her story from others in town, but hearing it from her own lips made it real in a way gossip never could. It must get lonely, he said quietly. Her eyes met his. Yes. But I suspect you understand that kind of lonely, Mr. Matthews. The honesty in her gaze unsettled him. Owen stood abruptly. You should rest. Doc says you need plenty of it still. A knowing smile touched her lips. Of course. Thank you again, Owen. As the second week of her recovery progressed, Rosalie's strength returned more rapidly. She began taking short walks around the room, then to the small porch outside. Owen remained nearby, though he sensed his role shifting from nurse to companion. On a clear afternoon, they sat together on the porch, watching as Silver Creek stirred with renewed activity. The last of the fever victims had either recovered or been buried. Life was returning to normal, or as normal as it could be after such loss. I need to reopen the store, Rosalie said suddenly. People will be needing supplies. Owen frowned. You're not strong enough yet. I'm stronger than I look, she countered. And I can't afford to keep the doors closed much longer. This illness has already cost me weeks of business. You could hire help, Owen suggested. Rosalie sighed. With what money? The store makes enough to support me, but not much more. They sat in silence for a moment before Owen spoke again. I could help. Just until you're back on your feet properly. She turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. But your work at the Mitchell Ranch, season's winding down. They're reducing the crew anyway. This wasn't entirely true. Mitchell would keep him on if he wanted to stay, but the lie came easily. I know enough about stock and figures to be useful. I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking. I'm offering. Owen met her gaze steadily. Let me help, Rosalie. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. After a long pause, she nodded. All right, but I'll pay you fairly for your work. Owen smiled. I reckon that's reasonable. The following day, they reopened Jenkins' general store together. Word spread quickly, and by noon, the small shop was bustling with customers. Many came as much to see Rosalie to assure themselves that she had indeed survived as to purchase goods. Owen observed the genuine affection townsfolk had for her, the relief in their faces when they saw her behind the counter. For her part, Rosalie maintained a brave front, though Owen could see the effort it cost her. By mid-afternoon, her face had grown pale with fatigue. When the last customer left, He gently but firmly steered her toward the chair behind the counter. "Sit," he instructed. "I'll finish up here." "Too tired to argue," she complied. "I thought I was stronger." "You are," he assured her. "But even strong people need time." As he counted the day's earnings and organized the ledger, Owen felt Rosalie watching him. When he glanced up, there was a thoughtful expression on her face. "What?" he asked. "You surprise me, Owen Matthews," she said simply. "You're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" She considered the question. "Most cowboys who come through here are rough around the edges. Good with horses, maybe, but not much else. You have a careful way about you. Thoughtful. And you're good with figures." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with her assessment. "Had a schoolteacher aunt who insisted I learn my sums properly. Said a man who couldn't count would always be at another's mercy." "Smart woman," Rosalie remarked. "Did she raise you?" "For a time. Until her new husband decided I was one mouth too many." The flash of anger in Rosalie's eyes took him by surprise. "That's unjust." "Life often is," he replied evenly. "But it worked out. I learned to rely on myself." "At what cost?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air between them, too personal, too perceptive. Owen busied himself with the ledger again, and mercifully, Rosalie let the subject drop. Days turned into weeks as they settled into a routine. Owen would open the store early, Rosalie would join him mid-morning, and together they would manage the day's business. In the evenings, he'd walk her home to her small cabin behind the store, ensure she had a proper meal, and then return to the room he'd rented above the barber shop. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, just until Rosalie regained her full strength. But as October painted the surrounding mountains with brilliant golds and reds, neither mentioned any change to their situation. The store prospered under their joint management. Owen's practical knowledge complemented Rosalie's understanding of the community's needs. They worked well together, anticipating each other's thoughts, moving in a dance of efficient partnership. Talk began to circulate in Silver Creek, of course. In a town that's small, two unmarried people working in such close proximity inevitably sparked speculation. Owen heard the whispers when he collected mail or stopped for a drink at the saloon. He ignored them as best he could, though some part of him recognized the truth they contained. He was falling for Rosalie Jenkins, slowly but surely. It wasn't just her beauty, though that certainly played a part. It was her resilience, her sharp mind, her unexpected humor. It was the way she treated everyone who entered her store with the same respect, whether they were the banker's wife or a dirt-poor miner. It was the quiet strength that had brought her through illness and loss. But Owen said nothing of these feelings. Rosalie still wore her wedding ring. She still spoke of Robert and I when recounting the early days of the store. Her heart, Owen assumed, remained with her dead husband, and he had no right to intrude upon that grief. So he kept his growing affection carefully contained, focusing instead on being the partner she needed in business, the friend she seemed to value in her life. Until the night everything changed. It was late October, and an early snow had dusted Silver Creek with white. They'd closed the store early, due to the weather, and Owen had built up the fire in Rosalie's cabin before preparing to leave for his own lodgings. "Stay," Rosalie said suddenly as he reached for his coat. "The snow's getting worse. You can take the chair by the fire." Owen hesitated. "People will talk." A hint of amusement crossed her face. "Owen, people already talk. We might as well be comfortable while they do so." The practicality of her argument won out over his concerns about propriety. The snow was indeed thickening, and the walk to his room suddenly seemed unnecessarily challenging. "All right," he agreed, "but just until the weather eases." They settled into a companionable evening. Rosalie mended a torn shirt while Owen cleaned his revolver, a habit from years on the trail, when a well-maintained weapon often meant the difference between life and death. The fire crackled pleasantly, and outside, the world grew increasingly white and silent. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rosalie said after a long silence. Owen looked up from his work. "You can ask." She set her mending aside. "Why have you never married? A man with your qualities, surely there have been opportunities." The question caught him off guard. "Never stayed in one place long enough, I suppose." "Is that the only reason?" Owen carefully reassembled his revolver, buying time to consider his answer. "When I was younger, I had nothing to offer a wife. No land, no prospects. Just a saddle and whatever wages I could earn. Later." He paused. "Later, I guess I'd grown used to being alone. And now." Her voice was quiet, her eyes intent on his face. "Now." He returned the revolver to its holster. "Now I'm beginning to wonder if I've been running from something all these years." "What would that be?" Owen met her gaze directly. "The possibility of loss. If you don't let yourself care too deeply, you can't be hurt too badly when it's taken away." Rosalie nodded slowly. "I understand that fear. After Robert died, I thought I'd never risk my heart again. The pain was overwhelming. And now?" Owen echoed her earlier question. She looked down at her hands, at the gold band that gleamed in the firelight. "Now I think perhaps the greater risk is never loving at all." With deliberate movements, she slipped the ring from her finger and placed it on the small table beside her chair. The simple action held the weight of ceremony, of a chapter closing. When she looked up at Owen again, something had shifted in her eyes. "Life is uncertain. The fever taught me that, if nothing else, we may have years ahead of us, or days. I don't want to waste whatever time I have left in fear." Owen's heart hammered against his ribs. "Rosalie, I've seen how you look at me, Owen," she said gently. "When you think I won't notice. And I've tried to pretend I don't feel the same way, out of loyalty to a ghost. But Robert wouldn't want me to live half a life in his memory." Owen stood, moved to the window, stared out at the swirling snow. Emotions he'd kept carefully controlled for weeks threatened to overwhelm him. "I never intended this," he said at last. "When I stay to help you, I never thought I know." She had risen too, standing behind him now. "Neither did I. But here we are." He turned to face her. In the firelight, her auburn hair gleamed with highlights of copper and gold. Her eyes, clear and direct, held no fever, now only certainty. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said hoarsely. "I don't have much to offer except hard work and loyalty." "Those are worth more than gold to me," Rosalie replied. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I'm not asking for promises, Owen. Just honesty. Tell me what you feel." The walls he'd built over a lifetime of keeping people at a distance crumbled in that moment. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I sat beside your sickbed, watching you fight for every breath. You're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known, and the thought of riding away from Silver Creek from you feels like cutting off a part of myself." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Then don't ride away." He raised a hand to her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Are you certain? I need you to be certain." "I am," she whispered. "I love you, Owen Matthews. I didn't expect to find love again, but here it is." The distance between them vanished as Owen drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer wrapped together. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. "Stay," Rosalie said again, but this time the word held new meaning. "For tonight?" he asked. "For as long as you want." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white. Inside the small cabin, two people who had known too much loneliness discovered the courage to begin again. The winter of 1878-1879 proved to be one of the harshest in Colorado's memory. Snow piled in drifts taller than a man, and temperatures plummeted so low that whiskey froze in bottles. But inside Jenkins' general store, warmth prevailed. Owen and Rosalie faced the challenges of the season together. When supplies ran low, Owen organized expeditions to the nearest larger settlement, braving treacherous conditions to ensure Silver Creek's residents had what they needed. When illness threatened to revisit the town, though thankfully not the deadly fever of the summer, Rosalie worked with Doc Miller to distribute medicines and advice. Their partnership, both personal and professional, became the steady heartbeat of the community. Few eyebrows raised when it became known that Owen had moved permanently into Rosalie's cabin. In frontier towns, practicality often outweighed conventional morality, and even the most gossip-prone citizens had to admit that the couple's devotion to each other and to Silver Creek's welfare was beyond reproach. Still, there were those who questioned the propriety of their arrangement. Mrs. Hollister, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of social standards, made her disapproval known with pointed remarks and meaningful glances. Her husband, more pragmatic, reminded her that without Jenkins' general store and the determined couple who ran it, the town might not have survived the winter at all. "People will always talk," Rosalie told Owen one evening as they sat before the fire, reviewing the day's accounts. "It doesn't matter what we do or don't do. The only thing that matters is what's true between us." Owen nodded, though he couldn't help feeling that he'd compromised Rosalie's standing in the community. "Maybe we should make it official," he suggested, not for the first time. "I could speak to the preacher." Rosalie set aside the ledger and took his hand. "We will. When spring comes and the pass is clear, we'll do it properly. But Owen, I don't need a ceremony to know what we are to each other." He brought her hand to his lips. "Nor do I. But I want to give you the respect of a proper name my name." Her smile warmed him more thoroughly than the fire. "Then Mrs. Matthews I shall be, come spring." As February gave way to March, the grip of winter began to loosen. The snow receded gradually, revealing the muddy streets of Silver Creek once more. With the thaw came increased traffic, miners returning to work their claims, supply wagons making their way through mountain passes, and travelers heading further west. Business at the store boomed. Owen and Rosalie worked from dawn until dusk most days, barely finding time to eat, let alone plan a wedding. But they were happy in their shared purpose, in the life they were building together. One crisp March morning, as Owen unloaded a wagon of newly arrived supplies, he noticed a rider approaching from the east. There was something familiar about the man's posture, about the way he handled his horse. As the rider drew closer, recognition dawned. "Thomas," Owen called, setting down a crate of canned goods. The rider reined in his horse, a wide grin spreading across his weather-beaten face. "Owen Matthews, as I live and breathe. Heard you might be in these parts, but couldn't hardly believe it." The drifter finally dropped anchor, did he? Thomas Riley had been Owen's partner on cattle drives years earlier. They'd ridden together from Texas to Kansas more times than Owen could count, developing the easy friendship that comes from shared hardship and mutual respect. Owen strode forward to grasp his friend's hand. "What brings you to Silver Creek? Last I heard, you were heading to California." Thomas dismounted, his movements betraying a slight stiffness that hadn't been there when Owen knew him before. "Made it as far as San Francisco. Spent 2 years there before deciding city life wasn't for me. Been working my way back east since then." He glanced toward the store, taking in the freshly painted sign that now read, "Jenkins and Matthews General Merchandise." "Looks like you've done well for yourself," Thomas observed. "Partner in a business now? That's a far cry from the Owen Matthews I knew." Before Owen could respond, the store door opened and Rosalie emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She approached with the easy confidence that Owen had come to love, her smile welcoming as she sized up their visitor. "You must be a friend of Owen's," she said, extending her hand.
"I'm Rosalie Jenkins."
Thomas took her hand, clearly impressed by her direct manner. "Thomas Riley, madam. Owen and I rode together some years back." He glanced between them, noting the easy familiarity in their stance. "I'm guessing you're more than just business partners?" Owen slipped an arm around Rosalie's waist. "We're to be married next month, when the preacher makes his circuit through town." Thomas whistled low. "Well now, that explains it. Never thought I'd see the day Owen Matthews settled down." "You must be quite a woman, Miss Jenkins." Rosalie laughed, a sound that still made Owen's heart skip. "I like to think we settled each other, Mr. Riley. Now, you must stay for dinner and tell me all about Owen in his wilder days. I suspect there are stories he's neglected to share." The three of them spent the evening reminiscing, with Thomas delighting in recounting tales of their adventures on the trail. Owen watched Rosalie's face as she listened, seeing her piece together parts of his past he'd mentioned only in passing. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding and occasional amusement at his youthful follies. Later, after Thomas had gone to secure a room at the boarding house, Rosalie curled against Owen in their bed. "I like your friend," she said. "He shows me parts of you I never knew." Owen stroked her hair. "That was a different life. Before you. But it shaped you," she pointed out. "All those years on the trail, all those places you've seen, they made you the man I love." He considered this. "I suppose they did. Though I wonder sometimes who I might have become if I'd found a place like Silver Creek, a person like you, sooner." Rosalie raised herself on one elbow to look down at him. "We find each other when we're ready, Owen. Not before." "Wise as always," he murmured, drawing her down for a kiss. "Not always," she countered when they parted. "But I do know that the past matters less than the future we're building." That future took on new dimension the following week, when an opportunity arose that neither had anticipated. Hiram Buckley, who owned the largest building in Silver Creek, a two-story structure that housed his furniture business, announced his intention to sell and return east. His wife's health had never adapted to the mountain altitude, and after years of struggle, they decided to rejoin their grown children in Pennsylvania. "It's a solid building," Owen observed as he and Rosalie stood across the street, assessing the property. "Newer than ours, with room to expand the inventory." Rosalie nodded thoughtfully. "The location's better, too, right at the crossroads. And having living quarters above the store would be convenient." They had discussed, in vague terms, the limitations of their current arrangement. The store, while successful, was cramped. Rosalie's cabin, though cozy for two, offered little room for growth. Neither had spoken explicitly about children, but the possibility hovered in their shared future, unaddressed but present. "Buckley's asking a fair price," Owen said. "Between your savings and mine, we could manage the down payment. The rest we could pay over time from the store's profits." Rosalie squeezed his hand. "Are you sure? This would mean truly putting down roots. No more drifting." Owen looked down at her upturned face, at the woman who had transformed his understanding of home. "I'm sure. Silver Creek is where I want to be. Where we should be." 2 days later, they signed the papers in the bank, becoming the owners of the largest commercial building in town. The expanded store would open after their wedding, combining their inventories and adding new lines of goods that the growing community needed. As they left the bank, papers in hand, Owen felt a profound shift within himself. For the first time in his adult life, he had committed not just to a person, but to a place. The restlessness that had driven him for so many years seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. "What are you thinking?" Rosalie asked as they walked back toward their current store. Owen smiled. "I'm thinking that for a man who never planned to stay anywhere, I've suddenly acquired a lot of reasons not to leave." "Having second thoughts?" There was no worry in her question, only genuine curiosity. "Not one," he assured her. "Just marveling at how life changes when you least expect it." April arrived with a riot of wildflowers covering the mountain meadows. The town stirred with renewed energy as winter's isolation gave way to spring's promise. The date for Owen and Rosalie's wedding was set April 15th, when the circuit preacher would arrive in Silver Creek for his monthly visit. Preparations consumed what little free time they had. The new store needed renovations before they could move their inventory. Their current living spaces had to be packed up. Wedding plans, though modest by Eastern standards, still required attention. Through it all, their partnership deepened. Where once they had been two independent souls, now they moved in synchrony, anticipating each other's needs, sharing burdens without question. "You know," Thomas Riley remarked as he helped Owen move heavy shelving into the new store, "I've known men married 20 years who don't work together half as well as you two." Owen smiled, thinking of the easy rhythm he and Rosalie had established. "She understands me. Never thought anyone would, but she does." "Lucky man," Thomas said, not without a touch of envy. "She's quite a woman." "That she is," Owen agreed. "Still don't know what she sees in a saddled tramp like me." Thomas shook his head. "You always did sell yourself short, Matthews. You're a good man, loyal, honest. Those qualities are rarer than gold out here." The day before the wedding, Owen found himself unexpectedly nervous. Not about marrying Rosalie, of that he was more certain than he'd ever been of anything. Rather, he worried about being worthy of the life they were creating together. He confessed these doubts to Thomas as they shared a quiet drink in the saloon Owen's last night as a bachelor, though in truth he'd left that life behind months ago. "Every man feels that way before he marries," Thomas assured him. "It's natural to wonder if you're up to the task. But from what I've seen, you and Rosalie are well matched. You bring different strengths to the partnership." Owen nodded, turning his glass between his hands. "She deserves the best. And she's chosen you," Thomas pointed out. "Trust her judgment. Women often see more clearly than we do in these matters." When Owen returned to the cabin, he found Rosalie sitting at the small table, a letter in her hands. She looked up as he entered, and he saw that she'd been crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. She handed him the letter. "It's from my father. I wrote to tell him about our wedding. This is his response." Owen scanned the elegant handwriting. Rosalie's father, a prosperous merchant in Philadelphia, expressed his regret at being unable to attend the ceremony, but gave his blessing to the union. More surprisingly, he enclosed a substantial bank draft as a wedding gift, along with a promise to visit when business permitted. "I thought he disowned you," Owen said, confused by her tears. "When you decided to stay after Robert died." "He never disowned me," Rosalie explained, wiping her eyes. "He was hurt that I chose to remain here, disappointed that I wouldn't return to the life he'd planned for me. We've exchanged letters, but they've been distant, formal. This is the first time since Robert's death that he's sounded like my father again." Owen knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "I'm glad, Rosalie. Families should be together, even if only in heart." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "You are my family now, Owen. You, and whatever future we build here. And your father when he visits," Owen added. "I look forward to meeting the man who raised such an extraordinary daughter." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union. The entire town of Silver Creek, it seemed, had turned out for the occasion. The small church was filled to capacity, with latecomers standing in the back and children perched on parents' shoulders for a better view. Owen stood at the altar, uncharacteristically formal in a new suit purchased for the occasion. Thomas stood beside him as best man, offering quiet encouragement as they waited for the bride's arrival. When Rosalie appeared at the church door, Owen's breath caught. She wore a dress of deep blue silk, not white, for she was practical above all and knew she would wear this dress again for other occasions, with her auburn hair swept up and adorned with small white flowers. She had never looked more beautiful. Doc Miller escorted her down the aisle, a role he had insisted on claiming. "Since her father can't be here," he declared, "and since I'm partly responsible for bringing you two together, it's only fitting." The ceremony itself was brief, but heartfelt. Owen and Rosalie exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of partnership and respect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the congregation seemed to shake the very rafters of the little church. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up in the town square, laden with food contributed by nearly every household in Silver Creek. Music, laughter, and the occasional sound of gunfire shot celebratory into the air, despite the sheriff's half-hearted objections, filled the spring air. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Owen found a moment to pull Rosalie away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood tree. "Happy, Mrs. Matthews?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the distant lantern light. "Happier than I ever thought possible. And you, Mr. Matthews? Any regrets about tying yourself to a shopkeeper?" "Only that I didn't do it sooner," he replied honestly. "You've given me something I never knew I was missing, Rosalie. A home. A purpose beyond the next horizon. And love," she added softly. "And love," he agreed, bending to kiss her. "The greatest gift of all." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, but Owen knew the true celebration would begin when they were finally alone in their new home above the store, the beginning of their life together, not just as partners, but as husband and wife. The summer of 1879 brought prosperity to Silver Creek and to the newly established Matthews General Store. The town was growing, fueled by promising reports from the surrounding mines and the railroad's announcement of plans to extend a spur line to the area within 2 years. New families arrived weekly, and with them came increased demand for the goods and services Owen and Rosalie provided. They worked hard, rising before dawn, and often continuing well into the evening, but the work was satisfying because it was shared. Their living quarters above the store, though modest, became a true home, the first Owen had known since childhood, and a new beginning for Rosalie after years of widowhood. In late August, as the first hints of autumn touched the aspen leaves with gold, Rosalie made a discovery that would change their lives again. She'd been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired, sometimes nauseated in the mornings. At first, she'd attributed it to the long hours and summer heat. But as the symptoms persisted, a different explanation suggested itself. She confirmed her suspicions with Doc Miller before sharing the news with Owen. That evening, after they'd closed the store and shared a quiet meal, she took his hand across the table. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. They had discussed children in abstract terms, but had made no definite plans. Would Owen welcome this news, or would it revive his old fears of attachment and loss? Owen set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby," Rosalie said simply. "In March, Doc thinks." For a moment, Owen sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not his usual reserved smile, but one of unbridled joy. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Our baby." Rosalie nodded, relief washing through her at his reaction. "Are you happy about this?" "I know we hadn't planned." Owen rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Rosalie, you've already given me more than I ever thought to have. And now this a family of our own." He placed his hand gently on her still flat abdomen, wonder in his eyes. "A little person, half you and half me. Hopefully more like me than you," Rosalie teased, her own eyes bright with tears of joy. "One stubborn Matthews is quite enough in a household." Owen laughed, gathering her into his arms. "No argument there. But whether this child has your temperament or mine, they'll be loved. That I promise you." As Rosalie's pregnancy progressed, Owen found himself transformed by impending fatherhood. The man who had once drifted from place to place, avoiding lasting connections, now threw himself into creating security for his growing family. He expanded the store's inventory, added a line of children's goods, and even negotiated contracts to supply the mining companies directly, a move that significantly increased their profits. When Rosalie suggested hiring help so she could reduce her hours, Owen not only agreed but found the perfect assistant in young Sarah Peterson, whose mother had nursed many fever victims the previous summer. By Christmas, Silver Creek was blanketed in snow once again, but the memories of the previous winter's hardships had faded. The town celebrated the holiday with renewed spirit, and nowhere was that spirit more evident than in the Matthews household. Owen and Rosalie hosted a small gathering on Christmas Eve. Thomas Riley, who had decided to stay in Silver Creek and had found work as the livery stable manager, Doc Miller and his sister, who had recently arrived from the East, and a few other close friends. Their living quarters, festively decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, felt properly christened by the warmth of companionship and laughter. As they prepared for bed that night, Rosalie caught Owen standing at the window, gazing out at the moonlit snow. "What are you thinking?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting on the swell of her stomach, where their child grew. "I was thinking about last Christmas. About how close I came to losing you to the fever." Rosalie leaned into his embrace. "But you didn't lose me. You saved me, Owen." He shook his head. "We saved each other. I was just as lost as you were sick, only in a different way." She turned in his arms to face him. "And now," he said, his voice rich with certainty, "I'm found. We both are." The new year brought changes to Silver Creek. The promised railroad spur began construction, bringing an influx of workers and increased business to the town. The Matthews store thrived, becoming not just a commercial center, but a social one as well. Rosalie, despite her advancing pregnancy, instituted weekly reading sessions for the town's children, fostering a love of learning that had previously had little outlet in the frontier community. As February turned to March, Owen's anxiety grew. The memory of the previous summer's fever and the dangers of childbirth in frontier territories weighed on him. He insisted on bringing in a midwife from Denver to assist Doc Miller when Rosalie's time came, an expense she protested until she saw the fear beneath his practical arguments. "If it brings you peace of mind," she finally conceded, "then it's worth every penny." The midwife, Mrs. Abernathy, arrived 2 weeks before Rosalie's expected due date. A no-nonsense woman with 30 years' experience bringing new life into the world, she quickly established herself in the Matthews household, rearranging furniture and giving instructions that neither Owen nor Rosalie dared contradict. "First babies often come late," she informed them over dinner the night of her arrival. "But best to be prepared early. Things can happen quick on the frontier." Her words proved prophetic. 3 days later, in the quiet hours before dawn, Rosalie woke with the first pains of labor. By the time the sun rose, the contractions were coming regularly, and Mrs. Abernathy had taken command of the situation with brisk efficiency. "Out with you now," she told Owen after he'd fetched water, towels, and everything else on her list. "Send the boy for Doc Miller, then wait downstairs. This is women's work." But Rosalie, between pains, caught his hand. "Stay," she said firmly. "I want you with me, Owen." Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow, but didn't object further. In truth, she'd seen more husbands present at births in these Western territories than she ever had back east. Frontier life bred its own rules and customs. The labor progressed steadily through the morning and into the afternoon. Owen remained at Rosalie's side, wiping her brow, supporting her through contractions, murmuring encouragement. When Doc Miller arrived, he seemed unsurprised to find Owen still present. He stayed with her through the fever, the doctor remarked to Mrs. Abernathy. Doubt wild horses could drag him away now. As the sun began its descent, Rosalie's labor intensified. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced before, but through it all, she maintained the same determination that had characterized her life in Silver Creek. When Mrs. Abernathy finally announced it was time to push, Rosalie gripped Owen's hand with surprising strength. "Remember," she gasped between efforts, "we agreed on Robert if it's a boy, after my first husband." Owen nodded. "And Elizabeth for a girl, after my mother." The next contraction took her words away, but her eyes held his, drawing strength from his steady presence. At precisely 7 o'clock in the evening on March 12, 1880, Elizabeth Matthews announced her arrival with a robust cry that brought tears to her father's eyes. Mrs. Abernathy efficiently cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing her in Rosalie's arms. "A fine, healthy girl," the midwife declared. "Good strong lungs, which serves well out here." Owen stared in wonder at the tiny face of his daughter, the perfect miniature features, the wisp of dark hair that suggested she might favor him in coloring, the tiny hand that curled reflexively around his finger when he touched her palm. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Rosalie, she's absolutely perfect." Rosalie smiled tiredly, the exhaustion of labor evident, but unable to dim the joy in her eyes. "Of course she is. She's ours." News of Elizabeth's birth spread through Silver Creek with remarkable speed. By the following morning, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the store, bearing gifts and good wishes. Owen kept them at bay, allowing only a few trusted friends upstairs to meet the newest citizen of the town. Thomas Riley, granted the privilege of being among the first visitors, held the infant with surprising gentleness for a man more accustomed to handling horses than babies. "She has your eyes, Owen," he observed. "Poor child." Owen laughed, too happy to take offense. "Let's hope she has her mother's good sense at least." "And your loyalty," Rosalie added from the bed where she rested. "That's a quality worth passing on." Life adjusted to accommodate Elizabeth's presence. The store's back room was converted into a nursery where Rosalie could tend to the baby while still overseeing business. Owen took on more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Rosalie time to recover and bond with their daughter. Sarah Peterson's hours were increased, and she proved invaluable during this transition. The months passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion. Elizabeth thrived, growing from a newborn into an alert, engaging infant with remarkable speed. Owen found himself transformed by fatherhood in ways he had never anticipated. The man who had once avoided attachments now centered his world around two people: his wife and his daughter. On Elizabeth's 6-month birthday, as autumn painted the mountains with brilliant color once again, Owen and Rosalie took their daughter on her first picnic. They chose a spot on a hillside overlooking Silver Creek, spreading a blanket beneath an aspen tree whose leaves trembled gold in the October sunlight. Elizabeth, now able to sit with support, babbled happily as she watched leaves dance in the gentle breeze. Rosalie unpacked the lunch she'd prepared, while Owen kept a protective eye on both his girls. "I received a letter from my father yesterday," Rosalie mentioned as they ate. "He's planning to visit in the spring. He wants to meet his granddaughter." Owen nodded, pleased by the news. "That's good. Families should know each other." "He asked if we'd consider visiting Philadelphia someday," Rosalie continued. "He'd like to introduce Elizabeth to his world." Owen considered this. A year ago, the thought of traveling east would have filled him with dread. Too many people, too much civilization. But now, with Rosalie and Elizabeth, the prospect seemed less daunting. "We could go," he said thoughtfully. "Not right away, but when Elizabeth is a bit older. It would be good for her to know both sides of her heritage, the frontier and the city." Rosalie's smile warmed him. "I'd like that. And I'd like to show you where I grew up. It's a different world, Owen." "As long as we come home to Silver Creek," he stipulated. "This is where we belong." Always, she agreed. This is our place. As they talked, Elizabeth grew drowsy in the autumn sunshine. Owen gathered her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit there, at how natural it felt to hold his child close to his heart. Do you ever think about that summer? Rosalie asked suddenly. When the fever came? Owen nodded, his eyes on the sleeping infant. Often. How could I not? It changed everything. I was so ill, Rosalie recalled. I remember fragments, the heat, the pain. And your voice, Owen. I remember your voice keeping me tethered to this world when it would have been easier to let go. Owen swallowed hard at the memory. You fought so hard. I just tried to give you something to fight for. You did more than that, she said softly. You showed me that life could begin again. That love could be found in the most unexpected circumstances. She reached for his free hand, interlacing her fingers with his. A woman shivered with fever in bed. A cowboy pressed a cloth to her brow and whispered, "Rest," she murmured. Who could have imagined where that moment would lead us? Owen looked down at their joined hands, at the wedding bands that gleamed in the autumn light, then at their sleeping daughter, the embodiment of the love that had grown from that desperate night. I couldn't have imagined it, he admitted, but now I can't imagine any other path. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the little family gathered their things and started back toward town. Silver Creek lay before them, no longer just a place on a map, but the setting for their shared story, a story that had begun in illness and fear but had transformed into one of healing and hope. Owen carried Elizabeth, while Rosalie walked beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Together they moved forward, 3 hearts beating in harmony, their future as wide open as the western sky above them. In the years that followed, Silver Creek grew from a struggling mining town into a prosperous community. The railroad connection brought new opportunities, and the Matthews store expanded accordingly. Owen and Rosalie added a second child to their family, Robert Owen Matthews, born in the summer of 1882, as sturdy and determined as his older sister. The fever that had once threatened to destroy Silver Creek became a distant memory, referenced occasionally when old-timers gathered to reminisce. Few remembered that the town's most successful merchant and his wife had found each other during those dark days, their love forged in the crucible of illness and recovery. But Owen and Rosalie remembered. Each year, on the anniversary of the day her fever broke, they would share a private moment of gratitude for survival, for second chances, for the life they had built together. And sometimes, when a young couple would arrive in town, seeking advice on starting a business or building a home in this frontier community, Owen would offer the wisdom he had earned through his journey from drifter to family man. The West offers many treasures, he would tell them, his eyes finding Rosalie across the store. Gold in the mountains, land for the taking. But the greatest treasure is finding someone to share it all with, someone who makes any place, no matter how wild or remote, feel like home.